This podcast is for general information only. It is not intended as a substitute for general healthcare services. If you have medical conditions, you need to see your doctor. Use of this information is at the user's own risk. Welcome to FitRx with Dr. Greg Dennis. Join me as we challenge the standard sick model of healthcare. This is your source for everything health, wellness, prevention, fitness, biohacking, and more. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of FitRx. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis. I am so excited to have my guest today. This has been a long time coming, Dr. Nasha Winters. She is a naturopathic doctor who is an integrative oncology specialist, author of The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, which is kind of how I discovered her, which we're going to talk about that. Also, the author of Mistletoe and the Emerging Future of Integrative Oncology. She's the host of the Metabolic Matters podcast, executive director of the nonprofit organization, the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health. She's internationally recognized authority in integrative cancer. I could go on and on. So I'm just really happy to have her on. I discovered her after I had a loved one diagnosed with cancer last year, and I started reading The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. It is an incredible book full of all kinds of information for not only those who have cancer, but I have actually recommended to patients just as a general way to live. I mean, just as a not only a way to prevent cancer, but just to be healthy. It is just full of so much good information. So just really excited and happy to dive into that. So Dr. Nasha, thank you so much for coming on the show.
I love it. Thank you so much for having me. And I love that before the show started, we realized we have some beautiful Colorado and Kansas, Oklahoma connections. So it's neat to even realize how we're still, barely six degrees of separation here. So great to be with you and your listeners. Thank you.
There you go. Well, let's just get into it. Talk about, if you will, how you got here, how you got interested in integrative oncology specifically, and then just where you got all this knowledge, because again, that book is full of so much information, and just how you got to writing a book and becoming really an expert around the world in integrative oncology. How did you get to this point?
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction and segue into this conversation. And for your listeners, they probably assume, a lot of people don't say, I think I'm going to go work in the field of oncology because it just seems interesting. Most of us work in this field because of our own personal story. It's either impacted a loved one or ourselves directly. And that's how my story began. I was 19 years old when I was diagnosed with end-stage terminal ovarian cancer. And it had gone kind of missed for a long time because I had a plethora of health issues prior to that had frankly been rather normalized. I know that you got left kind of the standard of care model and moved into functional, more functional integrated model in your own experience, because everyone just like, oh, just easy. There's a pill for that. Just take that and ignore it. Don't worry about X, Y, and Z diagnosis or whatnot. There's a pill for that. Ignore it. And so by the time I had my cancer diagnosis, I'd also had been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, with polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, thyroid dysfunction, which I later learned was Hashimoto's autoimmune thyroiditis, IBS, at that time, terrible cystic acne, which we didn't realize was actually part of the PCOS process. It was just a pile of things. And no one made any deal out of it. I was still a fully functional human, captain of my volleyball team, very physically active, didn't look sick to the outside world, but I was a pretty hot mess. And so as my symptoms started to get worse and worse and worse over time, we all just assumed, rightly so, that this was just an extension of my previous diagnoses, that my IBS was flaring, or my polycystic ovarian syndrome, or my endometriosis pelvic pain was flaring, all the things. And so by the time my roommate found me unconscious and rushed me to the ER after I was showing up in the ER about once a week, or at least a couple times a month for the 6 months leading up to my diagnosis, begging for someone to take a different look. Instead, I would just be given another script. I would be treated as a histrionic, drug-seeking female. And that's when I showed up there, and I had a different doctor was on staff that night and recognized a few things when he saw me. At that point, I had a full belly full of ascites, malignant ascites. I had little stick legs and arms, which we recognize now as a later stage cachexia, which is sarcopenia, metabolic muscle breakdown, because all my fuel sources were going to feed cancer versus my body. I had a complete bowel blockage. My kidneys were in failure. My liver was in failure. I had a grapefruit-sized tumor on my right ovary. I had carcinomatosis, little scatterings, little like shrapnel of cancer all throughout my peritoneal, throughout my abdomen, questionable things in my lungs. I had a very low, my oxygen levels were in the 70s. As healthcare providers, you hear that and you kind of go, wow, how are you even alive? And
but other than that, you were okay.
Other than that, it was fine, right? Exactly. And the funny thing is my personality is quite, probably obvious here, quite big and intense. I was even like laughing by the time I woke up and conversing, they were all kind of shocked. And in fact, when they finally did the proper testing and an examination and some imaging that they were able to do at that time in 1991, we didn't have the final diagnosis. It would still take a few weeks to get the results back from a biopsy and the fluid they were able to pull out. They also sent off for biopsy and the imaging. And the CA-125, which is the cancer marker specific to ovarian cancer, being at over 15,000 at that time. The man who came in to give me the bad news literally was crying because he had a daughter my age. And ironically, I spent that time comforting him. And that's just also my nature. So very interesting dance of that diagnosis. And I had been pre-med at that time, and it kind of soured me to conventional medicine. They sent me home to die. They said I had 3 months to live. And I said, well, with treatment. And they're like, oh no, that's with treatment. I'm like, well, what happens if I don't do treatment? And like, about 3 months to live. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to go down that path. If I only have 3 months, I don't want to be sick with treatment the whole time. Mm-hmm. Here we are over almost 33 years later. And the rest of the journey has been about understanding why a 19-year-old, almost 20-year-old at that time was diagnosed with a very aggressive and mostly associated with like women in the ages of, 60, 70, why this was showing up in me. This is back in 1991, mind you, so we didn't know the things we know today. But that's where my journey began. And I've had the pleasure of kicking the can down the road enough to learn something new and apply it to myself and gain benefit from it, and kick the can further and learn something new, apply it to myself, and keep doing that until I also started going to medical school and learning things and applying it to other patients in the future. So that's where we are. It's been a 3-decade journey of learning and evolving. And when you said, gosh, your book is so chock full, that's at least 3 decades worth of information I've gleaned from experts all over the world, from every walk of life you can imagine, from very conventional standard of care oncology to very integrative functional medicine ideology, to naturopathy, homeopathy, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, even ancient shamanic healing practices I was exposed to during these 30 years that really have taken me on quite a journey.
Wow. That's a fascinating story, and congratulations, obviously, on beating that. But when you got that diagnosis, you didn't have all this information that you have now. You didn't have the Metabolic Approach cancer book to go by. So, you had, according to them, 3 months.
Yeah.
What did you do first? I mean, without you didn't know what to do. You weren't going to do conventional treatment because they said it would do no good. Like, listeners are probably wondering, I'm wondering, how did you even make it past that point to then learn more, in the future?
Yeah. Well, what I try to tell people is this is always a little harder part of the story to tell, but I actually wasn't sure I wanted to live prior to that diagnosis. I'd actually tried to take my life on 2 occasions. I'd come from pretty extreme trauma. And the world did not seem like it was filled with hope and wonder for me. It seemed like this was a little bit of a sexier way to go, kind of a martyred way to go. And so at first I actually welcomed the diagnosis. It was sort of a weird relief. But then this other thing got kicked in. I think when someone tells me, I think the other gene I got was the double dog dare you gene. And so when someone says it can't be done, I kind of say, well, get out of my way while I do it. And so that sort of path got triggered in me at the same time of thinking, oh, maybe this is a good exit strategy, or I'll show you. And so the I'll show you vibe is sort of what took over. But the first thing I did or didn't do was stop eating. And that sounds really weird to people because I had such a bowel blockage that any amount of even sips of water caused excruciating pain and nausea. And so there was absolutely no way I was going to get solid foods in there. And so I ended up on an accidental forced fast for 2.5 months. We did not know, or I did not know, and probably a lot of people did not know this information now, but now you can look back in the archives and see that as early as 1909, Dr. Moreshi and others were documenting just the use of fasting, water fasting alone for tumor debulking, for cytotoxic reduction, for lowering the size of tumors, that alone was very successful. And fasting alone was used into the 1960s as an effective adjuvant therapy for cancer treatment until someone got it in their mind that, oh, these poor people are already going through so much, just feed them anything they want and anything they need. Mm-hmm. And we really went a wrong direction there. Okay. And so we still say that today in all medical institutions, in all chemo rooms, everyone is like, they're passing around cookies and sandwiches and diet sodas and all the lot, and that's really, really bad information, which is part of the premise of the whole metabolic approach to cancer. So that was my first accidental. The other thing is because of the trauma, I also made a concerted effort to start to deal with that trauma, to start to deal with some of that abuse and some of that background. And I also not only did a food fast, but I did a family fast. I did a fast from the people that caused a lot of harm in my life. I needed to change my environment on all levels, not just internally, but externally as well, because we are the expression of the 5 closest people in our lives around us. And I had, even those people are people I was close to, loved, family, blood, they were very toxic, very dangerous people into my health and my well-being. And so I had to find a new support system. I had to create a new family. I had to create a new path forward for my own self-preservation, which was a very powerful tool for me as well. And then the other things started to come. I'm a very big reader. I was pre-med already, so I had a mind for the sciences, and I started learning about certain herbs and certain nutrients and certain dietary approaches that could be helpful. And I started just being a living laboratory in it all. I want your listeners to know, and for you to know, that I had no expectation of fighting this. I did not come into this of a mentality of this is a battle, I'm going to win, this is something I'm going to fight. I simply wanted to understand it, and I wanted to make myself comfortable in the journey. So when I was still here 3 months later, kind of scratching my head like, well, it doesn't seem like I'm dying now. And as I was getting my the fluid drained from my belly a couple times a week in the beginning, and then once a week a little bit later, and then a couple times a month a little bit later, that fluid stopped coming back as often. The pain started to dissipate. My energy started to come back. I started to get an appetite. I was able to start to tolerate broths and then things that my body could handle. And the foods that I had eaten before, was very much a junk food vegetarian, I couldn't tolerate anymore. And so those were just these accidents, beautiful accidents along the way that I started to learn. So I think that's kind of the big picture, and I'm still learning 33 years later. In fact, a lot of oncologists would probably not call me cancer-free. And you still see things on imaging, you still find information in my body, but I'm living well with cancer. I'm not in a battle. We all have cancer all the time. I've just found a way to be in homeostasis with it. And if I am not taking care of myself, if I'm not paying attention, if I'm not looking under the hood on occasion and exploring what's really going on with me, it can get on the move again. It hasn't in a long time, but it definitely reminds me that it's possible for any of us to move into this path. And in fact, 50% of us will face this in our lifetime. Those are the current statistics globally. Yeah.
Well, let's get into the book if we can.
Sure can.
And, again, for my listeners, there's so much information in this book, and we are not going to do it justice in, this 40-minute whatever episode. And so I have written down the train 10. I feel like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that if we kind of go through those, that's kind of a good summary of the book. Is that?
I love it. That's great. Okay. And yeah.
Okay. So the train 10, and again, we're going to barely touched the surface on these just for time, but I'll go through these. And if listeners are interested, I mean, obviously pick up the book. But the first one is genetic, epigenetic, and nutrigenomic modifications. So
Helpful.
unpack that a little bit, if you would.
Sure, sure. So this is basically the cards you were dealt, that you came into this world with this information built into your DNA, built into your system. However, it's how you play the cards that matters, right? You might have been given this hand of cards, but how you choose to play them is what we have the power over. So genetics, we have treated cancer like a genetic disease, when in fact, less than 5% is in fact a truly genetic disease, causing cancer. Whereas 95% might have genetic implications, but those are gene expressions that we have the ability to control the expression of. So for instance, you might say, oh, my dad had diabetes, my grandfather had diabetes, my great-grandfather had diabetes, therefore I have diabetes, and that's why. That isn't why. It's probably the nature nurture game of how did you nourish yourself? What choices did you make in your diet and your lifestyle? What types of foods were you using? Were they in a genetic match to you or not? When you start to understand that about yourself, you start to realize that that buck stops with you. Just because it came through multiple generations prior to you does not mean you have to carry it forward, that you have to carry it or express it in this lifetime or pass it to future generations. So that's one of the things we've learned, that what we want to look at when we look at your single nucleotide polymorphisms, these genetic hiccups, if you will, that were passed down to us, we have the power to turn them on or off at will with our diet and with our lifestyle, and even with our thoughts, which is always really interesting. So people like Dr. Robert Ader, people like Dr. Candace Pert, Dr. Bruce Lipton, they started to speak about this concept of psychoneuroimmunology and its implications of how our thoughts and our emotions can impact our health. Well, our thoughts and emotions can impact the expression of our genes as well. And so that can turn on and off genes. So I mentioned to you and the listeners early on that I came from a lot of trauma, and there's something known as the adverse childhood events score. And trauma is also one of the terrain 10. So we'll come back around to this in a moment. But directly speaking, adverse childhood events increase the expression of some of the genes that make you more susceptible to a lot of chronic illnesses, including cancer. So as such, if someone has more than 3 experiences with adverse childhood events before the age of 18, so things like neglect, abuse, a certain lack of love, connection, they have a much higher incidence. They get literally wired genetically to have different immune functions, different inflammatory processes, different metabolic functions than those who did not have those same traumas. So trauma does matter. And so just to give context, I was a 10 out of 10 on that adverse childhood event score. And they show that once you get above 3, you have a 20% increase per number of having basically cancer in or a very chronic illness in a very young age. So it was no wonder that I was a 10 out of 10 and had all these experiences by the time I was 20. So that's just something for your listeners to know, that was genetically changing me and charging up the environment. Things like the way that when we go into some of the other drops in the bucket that we're going to dive into in a moment also impact how those genes express. So our metabolic, what we fuel our bodies with, what toxins we're exposed to impact our genetic expression. So even though we're talking about these terrain 10, we talk about them as if they're all very individual, but they also cross-pollinate. Yeah. So I think I want to leave that part of the topic of, you can learn what your blueprint is. You can test for that. There's a lot of direct-to-consumer testing out there. And it's just information to help you know what your strengths are and what maybe your vulnerabilities are, so that you can empower yourself to change your expression, to change your outcomes.
So this is kind of a loaded question here, but the first oncologist that we saw, I was either still reading your book or maybe had just finished your book. And I made the statement something about that, well, it appears that, and I was still learning at the time, but it appears that, cancer is more of a metabolic disease. And
that went over like a lead balloon.
They very politely ignored me. And I even said, well, I'm a physician, thinking that would give me some credibility. And they still very politely ignored me. Why are conventional oncologists, I guess, why do they not get this?
Well, in 1914, Theodore Boveri was the physician who coined the concept of cancer as a genetic disease. in 1917 into the early 1920s, another clinician and researcher was also doing research, which was Dr. Otto Warburg, who said, oh, wait a minute, it doesn't start at the gene. The gene is an expression of something that's more upstream, which is at that metabolic mitochondrial level. What Otto Warburg started to notice, and his work really took off and was in vogue until World War II, okay, was the fact that our mitochondria are functionally and structurally different in a cancering process than our healthy cellular mitochondria. And so mitochondria, for your listeners, are these little organs that live inside your cells. We've all not known them maybe as mighty mitochondria, the ATP factories, but they're much more than that. They're receptors of information. So they receive information from the environment inside and outside the body, through light, water, food, information, sound, vibration, you name it. That's what's coming in and informing the mitochondria of what environment or terrain they're in. Then they translate that information, send signals out to the rest of the system to respond in a particular way. When that's functioning well, our bodies know how to take out the garbage. They know how to kill off cells that are no longer serving us well. They know how to properly give us the fuel we need to feel good. In fact, your first sign of mitochondrial insufficiency is fatigue, which 80% of patients walking into a clinician's office complain of. So that's already clues. But ultimately, what Dr. Warburg started to notice is that if there's a metabolic shift and the mitochondria start to get sick, they start to burn fuel differently. They start to burn far more glucose than the healthy cells, and they start to change and ferment the environment around them and draw in more immune, inflammatory markers, immune markers. They try to bring in more blood flow to themselves to feed themselves even more sugar that's being broken down from food you're taking in, but also from your muscles, known as glucose, and from the liver, known as gluconeogenesis. And so they become basically sugar hogs. Now, that was really in vogue until Watson and Crick came out in the 1950s, who, actually was a woman who found the DNA helix, but they took the credit for it. So be it. But there we are. They found it, and we then shifted our energy again back into the genetic model. It was a sexier model, an easier model to fund and understand in the research realm. Also, Otto Warburg was a little bit controversial. There's a great book for your listeners called Ravenous, if they want to get the history of our metabolic versus genetic cause of cancer. And it's a fascinating story about Otto Warburg, his controversy, but also his brilliance. And so he was a German Jewish man who stayed behind when all of his colleagues were either carted off to concentration camps or fled the country, but he stayed and basically worked for Hitler doing cancer research and was perceived as a huge traitor to his community. He was also a gay man at that time, also not really, there was all these things. So he was so controversial on so many levels. And a lot of people perceived him as a betrayal, despite the fact that he was incredibly brilliant and won Nobel Prize for his work in mitochondria as the driving force of cancer. But that information basically got buried until many years later when people like Mina Bissell in the 1980s and Dr. Tom Seyfried in the late 1999s and early 2000s started to resurrect this understanding that cancer is actually a metabolic disease and not a genetic disease as the starting point. The genetics can still be involved, but they're not the driving force, which is how we've constructed our entire medical system today, is to see and treat cancer as a genetic disease, looking for a single target for a single treatment. So when you say, why do clinicians not know about this? It's because, number one, this information I'm sharing with you is not taught in medical schools. Number two, there's an entire system built up around it, an insurance model, an FDA model, a drug delivery system model, a research model, cancer awareness and pink ribbon models, run for the cure models, if you know what I'm saying. There's a huge industry built up around this, and it's very committed to the genetic theory of cancer. And it also, as researchers from Harvard suggest, makes cancer look like you're just a sitting duck. It's just bad luck and there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas a metabolic approach has a very different filter, which is there's a lot you can do about it. There's a bit of hope here. And when we adjust and impact that metabolic expression, that mitochondrial health, we in fact change the cancer expression in a pretty profound way, whether we stall growth, whether we reverse growth, or whether we enhance therapeutic interventions from whatever tools we're using, make those work better for you with less side effects. And so that is the future of oncology is metabolic oncology. Even you or your listeners have either read or heard about Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee, who wrote a book, Cancer, The Emperor of All Maladies, and it's the biography of cancer. He himself is a prolific cancer researcher and oncologist and wrote beautiful books. He wrote that book, followed by a book called The Gene, and his third book was called The Cell. All three of these books are beautiful. He was very much a genetic theory of cancer kind of guy who actually went out to disprove the metabolic theory of cancer. And in doing so, realized, wait a minute, I think it is a metabolic approach. So we've watched him in his own career change, and he's one of the best researchers in this field today in the metabolic approach, but the industry is still beating to the drum of an outdated, antiquated, sinking Titanic of cancer and cancer care. And especially when your listeners know that 1 in 2 of us are expected to have this diagnosis in our lifetime, that the World Health Organization expects a doubling of cancer rates globally by 2040, and that rates in young people are something we've never seen before. Those under the age of 40 are seeing cancer at levels that have never been seen across all cancer types. And that in the past 17, 18 years, the best we've been able to offer in overall survival with all the drugs that have come out to the market that we've spent billions and billions of dollars on, at best give us an average of 2.4 months of overall survival. That's what we're celebrating. And those are all the things that are coming from still a genetic ideology driving the train. It is absolutely an idea that's time has come and gone, and that can still move in tandem with the metabolic theory, but the metabolic theory needs to take its rightful place at the front of the line.
That could overlap with a lot, not only cancer, but a lot of different things in medicine, diabetes and stuff with that, which I, do a lot of that. I'm amazed now that I'm on this side of it, or my listeners have heard this, the conventional side of it doesn't work very well. And you would think, because of that, exactly what you're saying with cancer, that, people would be more open to taking a different approach because it really doesn't work well, but they're not. You're right. They're just so focused, but yeah, well, let's move on. So we can get through some of these. Next is blood sugar balance. So you mentioned that, and this has been my experience as well, that oncologists will say, eat whatever you want. I mean, you're undergoing chemo, so just, you need calories, eat whatever. What is the importance of blood sugar as it pertains to cancer?
Sure. Well, very specifically, we know through lots of studies, through lots of evidence, that if you have elevated insulin or elevated glucose levels, you have desensitized the cancer cell to things like radiation, to things like PARP inhibitors, to things like other cytotoxic therapies, other chemotherapeutic interventions. So literally, the sugar in your blood is making the treatment less effective. That's a pretty straightforward analogy. When we even do imaging to check you, a PET scan uses something known as an FDG uptake of a radioisotope of glucose that gets usurped by the tumor to show where there's activity. We literally use sugar to find out where the cancer is and how it's acting in the body. And yet we still disregard that most fundamental information. We still ignore it somehow. It's such a cognitive dissonance. It blows my ever-loving mind, but it is. And then we also know that when the sugar is high in the body, we also have low immune function, and immunity is what helps keep the cells at bay. So it helps to say, hey, I recognize you over here and you shouldn't be there. So we need to do something about that, either keep you dormant or get you out of the body altogether. That's what the immune system is there for. That's how we actually fight off and prevent cancer, is through a functioning immune system. And sugar basically dismantles our immune function. And it changes our neurochemistry, our neuroendocrine system. It changes our circadian rhythms. It just changes everything and makes the system much more vulnerable to falling into the trap of a cancering process altogether. What's really interesting is when you get metabolically flexible, when you actually insulin restrict, carbohydrate restrict, you make the healthy cells more resilient to both ward off and not become cancerous, but also to tolerate what toxic cancer therapies are being brought on board. So it strengthens the response to standard of care, and it makes the cancer cells more vulnerable. It potentiates their response to whatever therapy. So it potentiates radiation, it potentiates chemotherapy and targeted therapies, and it makes the patient recover faster and feel better all throughout the treatment. So those are the things that we've learned, that food absolutely does matter, and that we have been shouting the bad advice of no matter what, don't lose weight. And yet over 60% of us are considered morbidly obese in the United States alone. That is tracking in the similar across the world. My experience has been that even our patients that look outwardly skinny have what we call our tophies, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And so it's not just about the physical container of if it looks overweight, it's what's wrapped around the organs, the adiposity, the adipose tissue, the fat tissue that's wrapped around our organs that are so our fat cells are also endocrine organs that give signals in the body. And so we need to change that. And that's what our food and fuel sources impact. So things like fasting, carb restricting, high fat, low carb intake, which is a therapeutic ketogenic diet. Even just a pure carnivore diet can do the trick for some people. A pure vegan diet that is low carb vegan with a lot of fasting, a Mediterranean diet that's low carb with a lot of fasting. There's a multitude of ways to achieve metabolic flexibility. So there's not just one way to do that. You can even do it with pharmaceuticals, and you can even do it with exogenous ketones to help drive this metabolic shift to make the cancer cells more vulnerable to whatever treatments and to strengthen the healthy cells. So yes, metabolic choices, food, fuels do matter in your success in both the prevention of and treatment of cancer and prevention of recurrence once you've had it.
Yeah. Very good. And we could have a whole episode on just that,
Exactly.
but
Totally. Yeah.
but we'll move on.
Yeah.
Number 3 is a toxic burden management. This is becoming something that I talk about more and more. It almost is depressing, when you think about it and you read about it, because we live in this toxic soup. I had a toxin expert on a little while back, and he was saying that, I'm sure you probably know this, but he was saying that now the number one toxin found in people that was checked was glyphosate, Roundup, that it has surpassed, the heavy metals, which used to be number one. And obviously that's in about everything.
Yeah.
So we live in this toxic soup, and obviously I'm sure that contributes some to cancer. But when you say toxic burden management, how do we do that? What are some things we can do to help with that?
Well, first, I love that. It's no longer a matter of if we have toxicity, it's how bad is it? And so when we're doing an intake, for instance, with our patients, we want to know their zip code. We also want to know the zip codes that they were conceived in, where they spent the first 2 years of their life, where they spent the first 7 years of their life, where they spent the menarche or the puberty era of their life, and their fertility era of their lives, because those are the most vulnerable spots that these chemicals impact our mitochondrial cellular health. Okay. So in that, we can now run a zip code, and I can go online and tell you what Superfund sites you live near. I can tell you what your air quality is all about. I can tell you what industries are around you that are causing known harm. So that tells me exactly what I'm going to find when I run a toxicity profile on you. And I can look at your water quality and know exactly what's in there. So everyone thinking that their refrigerator filters and their Britas are doing a good job, they're not even touching it. You might be getting chlorine out, maybe a few microorganisms, but otherwise you still are getting a ton of fluoride, a ton of arsenic, radiation, people's pharmaceuticals, chemotherapy agents, all of that you're taking in, right? So those are the things to keep in mind here. So when I talk about the burden, those are the things you have to start to do is audit yourself, audit your life. So you start, we talk about what think locally to act globally. That's where you start. You start in your own household. You start to go through, like I tell people, if I'm at your house, I'm looking in your cupboards, I'm looking in your medicine cabinet, I'm looking under your sink. I know the second I walk in your house how toxic it is. If I smell fragrance, anything, that's a known carcinogen, by the way. So get rid of those Febreze, get rid of those plugins, get rid of those scented candles, right? Even be careful with the essential oils out there, because a lot of them are highly synthetic and toxic as well. But this is the place you start to look at everything you put in and on and around you. So to know that a baby today is born with an average of 200 chemicals in the cord blood alone should probably make everyone's sphincters cringe just a little bit, that you're born in the toxic soup from the get-go. So you don't want to add more insult to injury. So taking a really good account of what your body care products, your house cleaning products are, that's where you can start. Are you still eating food or drinking out of plastic containers? Are you still handling plastic receipts? We're eating an average of a credit card a week of plastics right now. Creepy, right? One of the biggest endocrine disruptors. You nailed it with glyphosate. People like Stephanie Seneff and many others have been shouting. Dr. Huber is one of my mentors out from Indiana University, started sounding the alarm of the dangers of glyphosate in the late 1960s. Now is in his mid to late 90s, still shouting the alarm. How in the world this is still happening is beyond me. But it is ubiquitous. It's in our rainwater now. So even if you're eating your organic grains and legumes, organic doesn't get rid of glyphosate anymore. Like it's coming from the rainwater, soil sequesters it, and more specifically, the things that sequester glyphosate the most are grains and legumes. So, and then when we then think we're doing a great job, we go in juice, we're concentrating that stuff, right? The things that don't sequester it are things like animal products. Right? This is me, a recovered vegan, having this conversation. I can really upset and trigger a few people, but it's such a crazy world of events that now we can probably get as much, if not more, pollution from our plants as we can from our animals, depending on how things are raised today. But you can't basically get away from this. So toxicity is about becoming aware and helping your body take out the garbage. So get rid of as many things that you knowingly can get rid of in your environment. Find out if you live in an HOA, what's being used at your schoolyards, what's being like if you live on a campus, on a golf course, you have massive amounts of glyphosate. If you are like at a schoolyard, at parks where you're playing soccer with your kids, they're completely inundated with glyphosate. All of those beautiful green lawns you see, that's glyphosate, folks. Roundup is what they use on all of that, and that's what's rounding up our health issues. So you've got to start to take that out. I celebrate the dandelion, okay? Like, please do not be afraid of the mere dandelion, but you got to make sure your organs of elimination are working. You're pooping, you're peeing, you're hydrating, you're sweating, you're breathing. Your sweat, those are the things that you can do something with every single day, just with movement, really good quality water filtration, really good quality air filtering. Now, these are things that can cost money, but there are many and many, many organizations that are out there starting to supply these things through grants and things for even underserved communities. So there's no excuse for us to be able to do the best we can, even with the most minimal resources today. And then it's us collectively demanding a change in these environmental pollutants that are ubiquitous to our environment today. So awareness, and then at your own becoming an activist yourself is really where it's at, and cleaning things up in your home, simplifying. Like my cleaning products are white vinegar and baking soda. That takes care of almost everything. Right? Beyond that, I mean, that's even what I brush my teeth with is the baking soda, for crying out loud. And then you can pretty much do everything else. Keep it simple. Coconut oil as your moisturizer. Like these are the things, like it doesn't have to be any fancier. You could put a drop of peppermint oil into that. If you want something for your teeth, you can put a drop of an essential oil into your coconut oil. If you want a little scent on your body, these are the things, if you don't have money, those are very inexpensive, easy fixes. So, and then fasting is another really powerful way. So it kind of takes us back to the metabolic piece, to avoid eating on the clean 15 list and avoiding the dirty dozen. If you have no other financial resources around you, at least avoiding the dirty dozen of the toxic pesticide foods is really, really key. I absolutely don't eat celery or strawberries or peaches or bell peppers that were conventionally grown. They're just a giant pesticide cesspool. And you can even see what happens to families' blood when they just avoid the dirty dozen for 2 weeks. They can change the chemical components in their blood in that short of time. This is where people start to get involved in their own communities, create a community garden. If you're poor, bring your resources together, share a pig, share a cow that was ethically raised, grass-fed, grass-finished. Get a CSA, go to your farmers markets, get to know your local farmers, ranchers, or become one yourself, right? These are the ways. I'm very passionate. I speak at a lot of regenerative agricultural farms. We're actually building a hospital and a 1,200 acre organic regenerative farm. And so this is the way our system should be, is it should be soil to the soul, and our food matters and the pollutants we put on it matters. So it's a big one that you just covered here. And with these top three, like the epigenetics, the blueprint, the metabolic, the toxins, those last 7 I'll rush through quickly because it'll show how they all interface. The next one is the microbiome. We've already talked about, like, if you're eating crappy, your microbiome takes a beating. If you're having chemicals, your microbiome takes a beating. If you're taking antibiotics, your microbiome takes a beating. If you're doing colonoscopy prep, your microbiome takes a beating. If you're living on planet Earth today, your microbiome is taking a beating. If you're having any exposure to glyphosate, your microbiome is completely destroyed. Like, this is the way it is. Microbiome matters, right? And so digestion matters, microbiome matters. And then that in turn is the biggest When your microbiome is working well, so is your immune system. That's the fifth drop in this mitochondrial bucket. And when I was mentioning that cancer is very much an immune deficiency, an immune problem, our immune system has three R's: recognize, respond, and remember. And when we get really sick with autoimmunity, or really sick with allergies, or really sick with cancers, our body has lost one, if not all three of those R's. And so that is dependent on, like I said, if you have too much sugar, your immune system is off the grid. If you've got a problem in your microbiome in your gut, your immune system is off the grid. If you're under chronic stress and duress, your immune system is off the grid. So noticing again how they interact and interface with one another. Vitamin D is a huge one here. Most people are terrified of the sun. Most people have genetics that also make it difficult for them to absorb vitamin D orally very easily. It's important for people to know their vitamin D status, because that can be one of your most powerful tools for changing your epigenetic expression, for changing your metabolic health, your hormonal health, your mental health, and your immune health. So those are really powerful. And then the last five big ones: inflammation, hopefully should go without any further ado. Circulation and oxygenation. This is a big one. We're not perfusing well. People aren't breathing deeply. And a lot of us are walking around with sleep apnea, or just nose breathing, mouth breathing, shallow breathing, and not really perfusing our systems. Cancer loves to be in low oxygen environments. So you really want to make sure your oxygen levels are at their optimal. That's why exercise is so powerful. And then we look at the hormonal milieu. This is horrifying, because we're swimming in a total sea of endocrine disruption today. So those credit cards we're ingesting every week, the glyphosate we're ingesting several times a day in our meals, the chemicals we're putting on our body to look more beautiful for the world around us. Not to mention that if you are eating what I call Superfund site animals that are grown on these huge factory farming environments where they're pumped up with hormones and whatnot, that's a really bad idea. So these are the things you got to be mindful of. That changes your hormonal expression. We have 10-year-old boys with boobs bigger than mine. We've got, 20-year-old women who have never menstruated because their testosterone is higher than most 30-year-old men. We've got this inside out, upside down of our endocrine systems today that we're becoming almost eunuch across the board. Our bodies are so confused with all of the input of these endocrine disruptors from the world around us. And then the last two big ones: circadian rhythm and stress. That kind of goes hand in hand, and mental, emotional. And that's sort of where we started the conversation today, of just the adverse childhood events and the traumas, and those impact on all of these other 9, 10 drops in the bucket. They all completely interface. So what I do for myself, what I've learned for myself, was to understand what my primary drivers were, what my sort of top priorities were, which for me was trauma. That was my number one. Number two was hormonal milieu. And number three was epigenetic. Those were my three big drivers. And those what I've kind of accidentally worked on my whole life. But everybody else will have a very different, maybe top three. Right. And we, through the book and through a link that we can give to your listeners, we have a more expanded version of our Terrain 10 questionnaire. In the book, it's a very abbreviated, just to get you a sense of this, but we have a really more extensive one for you to really know how your body is working. What are your strengths and what are your challenges, and how to start to become aware and become empowered to do something about it before there's a problem. And if there is a problem, it will give you a good starting point of where to go. So that's what we start with in our world, is we want to understand the why. So the terrain, we call this the test. So the awareness, understanding, asking questions, looking under the hood, to understanding the patterns, which is the assess, which leads us to the address, which is, what are you going to do about it? Well, how are we going to course correct in whatever the situation is? And we don't jump right to protocols, which most people do in all fields of medicine for all things. We want to understand the chronology. We want to understand the biography of somebody's life as much as the biology of somebody's life, to know how best to move them forward to bring a stronger, healthier, more vital terrain.
So you may have just kind of answered my next question with what you just said, but when a lot of people are listening to this, and even when I'm talking to them, and I don't go into near the detail that even you just did about, changing their lifestyle, because the average American is, of course, they're overweight, they're insulin resistant, they're eating fast food. And so we start talking to them about diet and changing that up. And, oh, by the way, there's all kinds of toxins in your water and in your home and in your grass. And oh yeah, even if you're eating organic, yeah, that's not really good either. And you thought you were eating healthy and you're not. And people's eyes just, and they're like, okay, I'm not even going to do anything because it's impossible. I mean, it seems too big. Give us just some small steps to take for those listening of okay, what can I do today to, I just want to be healthier, I want to prevent cancer. I mean, what are some just big things we can do to just improve our overall health and help with a lot of these things that you're talking about?
First of all, I love that you really spoke to the place of overwhelm, because everything I just described, I recognize is overwhelming. And frankly, that's why we're sick. Our mitochondria are overwhelmed. So I wanted people to understand that, to then understand, okay, well, where do I start? Which is where you're taking us. So we are going to give you a free link of the extended version of the Terrain 10. So you can start there. Because when you take that questionnaire, you will then know what your priorities are. And then just focus there. Start with that number one thing. Maybe there's 5 that show up for you, but just pick one. Because anywhere you pull and tug and impact this, all the others benefit as well. Okay. So that could be a starting point for some people. But if other people, they don't like to read, they don't want to do a questionnaire, start simply. Start to look at your day-to-day choices. Okay. So what I tell everybody is start with the most simple. Start with fasting for 13 hours every single day, which means you finish dinner at say 7 p.m. and you do not eat again till 8 a.m. You can have as much water as you want. You would be shocked at how difficult that is for most people. If you find that's challenging for you, that's where you know that's probably the place you need to start first. If it's easy for you, great. Check that one off the list. You just keep doing that and you don't have to change anything else about your diet or lifestyle, because that alone through studies show that it's not even about what you're eating, it's about when you're eating and about giving yourself enough time for your body to digest and do something known as autophagy, to take out the garbage. Most of us are eating something every 2 to 4 hours, even through the middle of the night. And so that means we never take out the garbage. It just accumulates over time. And we never bring our insulin down. It stays revving high all the time. And that is a dangerous game. That's where you have problems with cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer, obesity, diabetes, all the things. You've got to insulin restrict. And so that's where fasting can be a very powerful tool, and it's free. Okay. So that's one place to start. The other place to start is start to reset your circadian rhythm. Know the cycles of the moon, the cycles of your sunrise, sunset, and start to become aware of them and try your best to at least watch a sunrise or a sunset every single day. Bonus if you can do both every day. And bonus if you can have a walk in the new moon and a walk on the full moon, because that resets a lot in your circadian rhythm through the receptors in our eyes, the pineal gland, even through the skull of the brain. Even the fingertips are sensitive to light around you. So making sure your room is blacked out except for natural moonlight. Otherwise, right? So if you live in the country away from any light pollution, I'm not worried about the moon. I'm definitely worried about if you've got any street lights shining in, if you've got any green lights in your room. In fact, I would make your room a completely EMF-free zone at night to turn off all that electricity and all the blue light and all of the light pollution exposures. That is another freebie. A lot of people just unplug their Wi-Fi every night. That can do a world of good for people with chronic insomnia issues as well. And pulling your bed away from walls that might have a lot of electricity, that can help a lot of people who have insomnia. You'd be shocked at how we're electrical beings, right? So we're very sensitive to electricity. Those are some simple hacks to start. I mentioned the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. Just go on that website, just Google Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, get that list with you and know that, hey, I'm going to invest a little bit more in the foods that are on the Dirty Dozen. I'm going to invest in organic on those. The others, don't worry about. If you're on a budget, just only buy organic of those Dirty Dozen, and the rest, don't stress about it. And then when it comes to kind of the emotional and the mental health, like breathe. Breath is a very powerful tool to reset your vagal nerve, to reset the system that is telling your body if you're in fight or flight. Your vagal nerve is in charge of that. When we shallow breathe, when we're under stress, when we don't know how to breathe properly, that keeps you in a state of sympathetic nervous system dominance, which means you're always running from a saber-toothed tiger, which is going to keep your cortisol up, your insulin up, your immune system down. All the things I just explained to you are free, right? And they're simple and they're incredibly impactful. And a lot of people almost poo-poo them or ignore them because they think it is too simple. But I will tell you right now, the patients I work with, they've spent fortunes on really sexy, expensive therapies, high dose vitamin C, off-label drugs, hyperthermia, hyperbaric oxygen. And I look at their sleep hygiene. I look at their day-to-day routine. I look at how they're breathing. I look if they can fast for 13 hours, and most of them have not started to even address the fundamentals. And so none of those amazing, expensive, sexy therapies are going to do anything if the fundamentals haven't been started with. So my hope is that gives you all a little bit of like, wow, I can access this right now without even taking the Terrain 10 questionnaire and start to make a difference. And if you've mastered any one of those, well, then move on to something else, master something new. Every little step matters. Maybe the next time you go to the grocery store, maybe you buy something in glass versus in plastic. Maybe the next time you replenish your Tupperware, get glass glass containers instead of plastic. Maybe the next time you ask for a receipt, just don't handle it. Just tell them, no, thank you. I don't need that receipt. I don't want to handle it. Start carrying around glass water bottles instead of plastic water bottles. Those are the simple places you can start to change things up. And then slowly over time, maybe you turn out your aluminum or Teflon covered cookware for a stainless steel or a cast iron, and just slowly start to make those changes. Any step you take makes a big difference. As I said, the mitochondria, they're taking in information. What you choose to give those little organs makes a difference. And every step you take to help protect them, they help in turn protect you.
Very nice. So Dr. Nasha, thank you for all of that. Again, for those people listening, we just, as you very well know, we touch the surface of this book. It is so full of information. I would encourage you to get the Metabolic Approach to Cancer just for learning about how to live a healthy lifestyle, and especially if you know somebody who's dealing with cancer, and most people do. And so I would highly encourage this book. To get a hold of you, and I will list all these in my notes, but drnasha.com, is that kind of the main one to just kind of follow you and see what you're doing? Okay. And there's some others that, you got a podcast, and again, I'll list all that in the notes. And so lastly, I know you got to go, but, I'm going to pinpoint you on one, because I ask my guest this every time as we leave. If you could give us one health tip to make us healthier today, what would the one be?
I already mentioned it. It's my favorite hack for myself. It's what really starts my day off right. It's to start my day with watching the sunrise. And in that, I focus on my breath when I'm doing that. I focus on my prayer, in that time, or, whatever meditation, whatever people, use in that place. And so my breath and kind of gratitude and spiritual time. It's a very kind of layered time for me, and it's very peaceful. And we're talking 15, 20 minutes. It's something I can really, and you can even have your cup of coffee or your cup of tea while you're doing it. You can multitask in doing the right thing to kick off your day. And it really does set the tone, not just for how you feel about your day, but it literally is resetting the tone at the cellular level and at the hormonal level through your pineal gland. And looking at that red light of the sunrise, it is literally resetting every one of your endocrine hormones from the get-go.
I love it. All right. Well, Dr. Nasha Winters, thank you so much for just what you do. Thank you for the book. Thank you for just being with us today. And I certainly appreciate just everyone listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you for listening to FitRx. I invite you to share this with friends and family. If you would like to contact me, you can visit our website at fitrxwellnessok.com, or you can email me at drgreg@fitrxwellnessok.com.